And behold, I am with you always until the end of the age. He said as he ascended into heaven, not to be seen again for more than 2,000 years. The Ascension is, I think, one of the more underrated feasts that we celebrate as Catholics. No one's going to wake up tomorrow morning anxious to see what the Ascension Bunny left for them in their Ascension basket, right? And I think part of that is, to be honest, a certain amount of embarrassment around this feast, if we're being kind of frank, right? This idea that Jesus is somehow flying through the air like Superman is kind of embarrassing to us as modern Catholics. And right, we believe that Christ ascended body and soul into heaven, so he went up. But Copernicus happened, and so like where is up? You know, we have this sense of like, well, if we just kind of point the Hubble telescope at the right spot, we're going to see Jesus like on one of the moons of Jupiter. There's kind of a genuine embarrassment, right? You're even kind of feeling it right now of like, oh, what do we do with this, right? And don't worry about that, right? There are theologians who have a lot of smart things to say, but there is a certain amount of like kind of genuine trepidation of like, we don't really know what to do with the Ascension. We just know it's a thing that we celebrate. And what's interesting is that the earliest Christians were really insistent that the Ascension really happened, right? They insisted, no, Jesus really rose from the dead, and he really ascended into heaven. It really happened. We saw it ourselves with our own eyes, right? And the church, right, teaches to this day that Jesus Christ ascended body and soul into heaven, and at this moment is body and soul as a full human being in heaven, interceding on our behalf, right, preparing a place for us. And that's what we celebrate today. So how do we understand that, right? We might be embarrassed or anxious about it, but how do we understand the importance of what we celebrate today? I think the clue is in the clouds. It says that Jesus is taken up into the sky, and a cloud took him from their sight. And it's easy to overlook that fact because, of course, there are clouds in the sky. So if Jesus goes up into the sky, of course there will be clouds. But a cloud is a very poignant and powerful scriptural image. Throughout the Old Testament, clouds appear at very specific moments in the history of Israel. We know that when Moses built the place of the meeting tent, when he constructed the tent according to God's design, which was God's dwelling on earth, that early primitive form of the temple, a cloud descended upon its consecration as a sign of God's presence with his people. And that as they journeyed through the desert, the cloud would lift from the tent and it would lead the people forward, right? It would be a pillar of cloud by day, pillar of fire by night, that the people of Israel were being led through the desert by a cloud, literally God's presence, right? And when Solomon created the first temple and consecrated it, a cloud descended upon the temple as a sign of God's presence, God's dwelling with his people, right? So in the scriptures, a cloud is a very clear sign of God's presence, especially God's liturgical presence in the temple, in the Holy of Holies, where the priests and the ministers would offer sacrifice and worship to God in the temple, right? So for Christ to ascend into a cloud is, I think, giving us a real important clue as to what's happening. That Jesus is not simply leaving us, but Jesus is entering into the Holy of Holies. He's entering into heaven, right? The perfect Holy of Holies, so that he can intercede on our behalf as priest. That Jesus Christ, the human and the God, right, can stand as the perfect and eternal priest before the Father and act as priest on our behalf. And just so you know, I'm not making this up, I have a Bible here. And in Hebrews chapter 9, right, the Bible talks about this. It says, "But when Christ appeared as a high priest of the good things that have come, then through the greater and more perfect tent, not made with hands, that is not of this creation, he entered once for all into the holy place, taking not the blood of goats and calves, but his own blood, thus securing an eternal redemption." And just a little bit further down, right? "Thus it was necessary for the copies of the heavenly things to be purified with these rites," so the inner tent or the Holy of Holies, "but the heavenly things themselves with better sacrifices than these. For Christ has entered, not into a sanctuary made with hands, a copy of the true one, but into heaven itself, now to appear in the presence of God on our behalf. Nor was it to offer himself repeatedly, as the high priest enters the holy place yearly with blood not his own. For then he would have had to suffer repeatedly since the foundation of the world. But as it is, he has appeared once for all at the end of the age to put away sin by the sacrifice of himself. Right? So what's going on here is the author of the book of the Hebrews is describing Christ entering into heaven as the priest on the holiest day in the Jewish calendar, Yom Kippur, entering into the Holy of Holies. Right? So what that priest would do is he would stand outside the Holy of Holies, and he would sacrifice goats and lambs, and he would chop them up, and he would burn the fat, and he would take the blood, and he would enter with the blood, he alone, the Holy of Holies where God dwelt. And he would disappear behind the veil, and he would sprinkle the blood on the Ark of the Covenant, pleading for God's mercy on his people, everybody who stood outside that the priest was pleading for on their behalf. Right? I was joking with some priest friends not too long ago that obviously being a priest is great, get to offer mass, I get to hear confessions, but being an Old Testament priest was like super cool. You got to kill things with your own hands and like burn things and like throw blood on people. Like it was a gory thing, and I'm willing to try it out. But what the priest would do is he would take the blood of the goat, right, and he would disappear behind the veil into the Holy of Holies, and he would intercede on behalf of all the people, right? And Hebrews is describing that this is what Christ does, that it's only when the priest disappears that he gets to work, right? And Christ disappears, not because he's abandoned us, not because he's floating on like Alpha Centauri somewhere, right? But that he has entered definitively into the Holy of Holies as high priest with his own blood, right, on the cross to win our eternal salvation. And we can rejoice in that, right? That's what he's doing right now at this moment. That at this moment and for all time until he, right, re-emerges from the veil as triumphant priest to bring us all with him into heaven, right? He is offering himself as both offering and priest on our behalf. And this is how we have sacraments. Right? That the sacraments are actions of Christ himself serving his body, the church. Right? That it is not the priest or deacon who baptizes when you were baptized. It is Christ himself who baptizes. Right? It is not the priest who offers Mass this evening. It is Jesus Christ himself through the priest who offers his very body and blood and feeds his very people with himself. Right? All the sacraments are efficacious. The only way they are effective is because at this moment, here and now, in heaven, the living person, Jesus Christ, is acting as priest. And he is the one who effects all the sacraments. And he is the one who makes it even possible, right, that I can stand up this evening and say, this is my body, this is my blood, and anything at all can happen because Christ is doing it. Right? And so we have great hope and joy this evening because we know that the Lord is with us always until the end of the age. He has not left us orphans. He has not abandoned us, right? But he has sent his Spirit to be with us always. And at this moment, he is acting as our priest on our behalf, winning for us time and time again, right? Graces and favors, and making the sacraments possible by his own very priesthood. And we can rejoice because we know that where he is, we also shall follow. Right? That where he is as priest now in heaven, he will bring us one day at the end of time to be with himself. Right? That where the head has gone, the body soon will follow. And so we can rejoice this evening because we as the body of Christ have already dived headfirst into heaven. Right? And those of you who are great swimmers know that where the head goes, the body follows as well. Right? And we can rejoice because we have a high priest who stands before the Father in heaven and is constantly interceding for us and is constantly praying for us and is constantly with us. He's not left us. He's not gone off somewhere into space. He's at the very depths of all of existence. He's in heaven for us. And we can rejoice in that, right? Because we are his very people. We are the ones whose blood, right, has been sprinkled through him, and we are now saved. And we can rejoice because we have a priest who was with us yesterday, today, and forever.